In a remote corner of western Tibet, far from any major city, stands a peak that has quietly resisted every attempt to reach its summit for as long as recorded mountaineering has existed. Mount Kailash rises to 6,638 meters, respectable, but hundreds of meters shorter than dozens of Himalayan peaks that have been climbed repeatedly, some of them decades ago, by mountaineers using far more primitive equipment than exists today. And yet, as far as any verified record shows, no human being has ever stood on its summit. The mountain's isolation has drawn Western explorers for well over a century, long before any pyramid theory existed to draw them there. Early 20th century explorers, including the Swedish geographer Sven Hedin, documented expeditions through the region and helped map the surrounding area in detail, without ever mounting a serious attempt on the summit itself, a restraint that had far more to do with the mountain's forbidding terrain and its residents' religious objections than with any lack of ambition on the explorer's part. The most obvious explanation is also the most well-documented one, and it isn't a mystery at all. Mount Kailash is considered one of the holiest sites on Earth across 4 separate religious traditions. In Hinduism, it's revered as the eternal seat of Lord Shiva, identified in scripture with the mythical Mount Meru, the axis mundi, or cosmic pillar, understood as the center of the physical, spiritual, and metaphysical universe all at once. In Tibetan Buddhism, the mountain, known locally as Kang Rinpoche, is understood as the dwelling place of the Buddha Demchok, or Chakrasamvara, and his consort, a figure representing the pinnacle of spiritual bliss, visualized as the living center of a great natural mandala. It's also the setting for one of Tibetan Buddhism's most famous legends. The poet saint Milarepa is said to have won a magical contest there against a rival Bon practitioner, then remained on the mountain afterward to meditate. Followers of Jainism know the peak as Ashtapada and regard it as the site where Rishabhanatha, the very first Tirthankara, a spiritual teacher who achieves final liberation from the endless cycle of rebirth, attained that liberation, or moksha, in person. Jain tradition holds that Rishabhanatha's own son later built shrines and stupas around the site to commemorate it, cementing its status as a pilgrimage destination within the faith. And adherents of the pre-Buddhist Bon tradition, Tibet's oldest indigenous religion, consider the mountain to be Yungdrung Gutseg, the 9-story swastika mountain, believing their founding teacher, Tonpa Shenrab Miwoche, physically descended there from the heavens to spread his teachings after a demon reportedly stole his horse and stranded him at the site, adding a further layer of geographic significance that has nothing to do with legend. 4 of South Asia's most important rivers, the Indus, the Sutlej, the Brahmaputra, and the Karnali, all originate within roughly 100 kilometers of the mountain, despite eventually flowing thousands of kilometers apart to empty into entirely different seas. That single small radius of high-altitude geography effectively feeds the water systems that much of the Indian subcontinent has depended on for its agriculture and civilization for thousands of years, giving the mountain's reputation as a source of life, a very literal hydrological basis alongside its purely spiritual one. The mountain's location adds its own layer of real-world sensitivity to any question of access. Kailash sits within the Ngari prefecture of the Tibet Autonomous Region, close to the point where the borders of China, India, and Nepal converge, a genuinely sensitive trijunction in a part of the world where territorial disputes between India and China have flared into real diplomatic and military tension in recent decades. That geopolitical backdrop means Kailash isn't simply an isolated natural wonder that happens to be hard to reach. It's a religious site sitting inside one of the more carefully monitored border regions on the entire Asian continent, adding a further, entirely secular layer of restriction on top of the religious and cultural reasons. The mountain has never been climbed. Even setting the pyramid theory entirely aside, visitors and pilgrims consistently describe the mountain's physical presence as unlike anything else in the surrounding Himalayan and trans-Himalayan ranges. Unlike the jagged, irregular peaks that dominate most of the region's skyline, Kailash rises as an almost eerily clean, four-sided form. Its black conglomerate rock face striped with horizontal bands that some traditions interpret as a ladder to the heavens. Snow-capped year-round and visually isolated enough from its neighboring peaks that it appears, from a distance, to stand entirely alone. A geological accident of shape and erosion that goes a long way toward explaining why so many traditions, independently of one another over thousands of years, arrived at the same instinct that this particular mountain looked less like a place to be climbed than a place to be approached with reverence. That religious reverence has real legal teeth behind it. Chinese authorities who administer the region have formally banned mountaineering permits for the peak, specifically in deference to its religious significance. Not merely a matter of local custom, but an actual, enforced government policy. The clearest test of that policy came in 2001, when a Spanish climbing team secured official permission to attempt the summit. The backlash was immediate and international. The Dalai Lama personally objected. Hindu religious authorities condemned the plan, and under the resulting pressure, the Spanish team withdrew before ever setting foot on the mountain. Reinhold Messner, the legendary mountaineer who was the first person to summit all 14 of the world's peaks above 8,000 meters, has said he was reportedly offered the chance to attempt Kailash at one point and declined on the stated principle that some mountains deserve to remain unclimbed. The administrative reality around the mountain today reflects that same official caution. The peak sits within the Ngari prefecture of the Tibet Autonomous Region, close to the point where the borders of China, India, and Nepal converge, and any foreign visitor hoping to even reach the base of the mountain, let alone attempt its slopes, must first obtain a Tibet travel permit through a registered tour agency, along with an additional alien's travel permit specifically required for the restricted border zones surrounding Kailash. Independent foreign travel to the site isn't permitted at all. Even the most devout pilgrims making the legal circumambulation are contending with a genuinely hazardous environment. Altitude sickness is a serious and common risk along the Kora, given that the route itself sits at elevations most travelers have never previously experienced, and the trekking season is tightly limited by weather, with deep snow and dangerous storms closing the route entirely for much of the winter. The mountain's mystique isn't confined to the four major faiths that formally venerate it. In the early 20th century, the Russian painter and mystic Nicholas Roerich, who traveled extensively through the region, became convinced that Kailash sat near the entrance to Shambhala, a legendary hidden kingdom described in Tibetan Buddhist tradition as home to a lineage of enlightened rulers. Roerich's writings helped popularize the Shambhala legend in the West throughout the 20th century, feeding directly into the same broader current of mystical fascination with the region that Muldashev's expedition would later tap into decades afterward. The base of the mountain is also the site of the demanding, roughly 52-kilometer Kora, or parikrama, the ritual circumambulation walked by pilgrims of every faith connected to the site, typically completed over 3 days. Most traditions direct expect pilgrims to walk clockwise, though Bon practitioners specifically circle the mountain counterclockwise, in keeping with their own distinct ritual conventions. Some devotees complete the route via full-body prostration across the entire distance, repeatedly lying flat, marking the ground with their fingertips, rising, and walking forward to the mark before prostrating again, a method that can stretch the same 52-kilometer journey out to several grueling weeks. The physical high point of the route is the Drolma La Pass, the highest section of the circuit, which different traditions interpret through their own theological lens. Hindu pilgrims regard the pass as the point where Shiva grants a vision to the prepared devotee, while Jain tradition frames the same crossing as mirroring Rishabhanatha's own multi-stage path to liberation. Most pilgrims who complete the full circuit single out the pre-dawn ascent to the pass, prayer flags snapping in the thin, cold air, as the single most memorable part of the entire journey. A smaller, more demanding inner Kora route also exists, bringing pilgrims even closer to the mountain's south face, though it's considered appropriate only for those who have already completed the standard outer circuit at least once. Tibetan tradition further holds that certain years carry outsized spiritual merit for the pilgrimage. Years in which the horse zodiac sign aligns with the fire element on the traditional 60-year calendrical cycle are believed to multiply the merit of a single circuit many times over, a conjunction that occurs only once in most pilgrims' lifetimes. None of that has stopped a very different, far stranger explanation from spreading widely over the last 2.5 decades, one with the trappings of science rather than religion. In 1999, a Russian ophthalmologist named Dr. Ernst Muldashev led an expedition to the Kailash region, bringing along specialists in geology, physics, and history, and returned with a set of claims that would ripple through fringe science communities for years afterward. Muldashev's central assertion was that Mount Kailash isn't a natural mountain at all, but a massive, hollow, man-made pyramid constructed by an ancient and technologically advanced civilization and surrounded by a complex of smaller artificial pyramids extending across the surrounding landscape. A city of pyramids, in his own framing, with Kailash itself as the largest structure in the group. He pointed to the mountain's unusually symmetrical, near-perfectly proportioned four faces as evidence no natural geological process could produce, and argued its dimensions matched the Great Pyramid of Giza once properly scaled, even suggesting the mountain was deliberately aligned with other ancient monuments around the world, including Egypt's pyramids and Peru's Machu Picchu and Teotihuacan, as proof of some coordinated, planet-spanning ancient design. Muldashev also reported hearing strange sounds during his expedition, describing what he interpreted as falling stones echoing from somewhere deep within the mountain's interior, an observation he presented as further evidence of hidden internal chambers, though it admits an equally simple explanation in ordinary rockfall and ice movement on any steep, weathered peak. Geologists studying the region have offered a considerably less exotic and considerably better supported explanation for the mountain's shape. Mount Kailash is composed primarily of a distinctive black conglomerate rock layered atop an older granite base, a geological combination that erodes unevenly under repeated freeze-thaw cycles and produces exactly the kind of sharp-edged, symmetrical faces the mountain is known for. This is the same well-understood process called glacial erosion, responsible for the equally sharp pyramidal profile of peaks like the Matterhorn in the Alps. A mountain nobody has ever seriously proposed was built by ancient aliens. Core samples and seismic surveys conducted in the region have found no evidence whatsoever of hollow chambers or artificial internal structures, and Muldashev's specific pyramid measurements and alignment claims have never been independently verified or published through any peer-reviewed geological or archaeological journal. His findings appeared instead in his own popular books and in Russian outlets receptive to fringe science, without the kind of independent replication that separates a genuine scientific claim from an assertion. Some of the numerology attached to the theory online has grown even more specific and even easier to check. Viral claims circulating on social media assert that Kailash sits exactly 6,666 kilometers from both the North Pole and from Stonehenge in England, framed as unmistakable evidence of deliberate ancient placement. Basic modern GPS measurement flatly contradicts this. The actual distances involved are off from that tidy figure by hundreds of kilometers, depending on which specific reference points and measurement methods are used. A discrepancy that collapses one of the theory's most frequently repeated proofs the moment anyone actually checks a map. The most dramatic claim tied to Muldashev's research, and the one that has traveled furthest from its original source, involves time itself. According to versions of the story that have circulated for over 2 decades, time behaves differently in Kailash's immediate vicinity, with some accounts claiming pilgrims have experienced rapid, unnatural aging, and others going further still, describing a group of Siberian climbers who supposedly aged decades worth in mere hours during an attempted ascent and died shortly afterward. No named climbers, no official expedition records, and no death certificates connected to this story have ever surfaced in over 20 years of the claim circulating, a level of undocumented specificity that would be extraordinary for a real, multi-fatality mountaineering incident, and that researchers who've tried to trace the story's origin have never been able to connect to an actual verified event. The concept of time genuinely slowing or accelerating requires either velocities approaching the speed of light or proximity to gravitational fields far more massive than a single Himalayan peak, physics that a mountain, however sacred, simply does not possess. A related but distinct version of the aging claim, also traced back to Muldashev's expedition, holds that he personally documented pilgrims' biological markers changing at a rate consistent with aging, roughly 2 weeks in a single 12-hour trek around the mountain's base. As with the Siberian climber's story, this specific claim has never been published with underlying data, methodology, or subject information available for outside review. No research paper detailing which biological markers were measured, how 2 weeks of aging was quantified, or which independent lab, if any, verified the results. Physicians and skeptics who have examined the claim point out that extreme high-altitude exertion, oxygen deprivation, dehydration, and sun exposure during a demanding trek can produce very real, very visible short-term physical strain, fatigue, dry and sun-damaged skin, cracked lips, weight loss, effects that could plausibly be mistaken or deliberately framed as accelerated aging by someone already looking for evidence of a mystical time anomaly without requiring any actual disruption to the passage of time itself. There is a real, unrelated geological curiosity at the base of Kailash that doesn't require any pyramid theory to appreciate on its own terms. 2 lakes sit side by side at the mountain's foot, fed by the same glacial sources, separated by only a narrow strip of land, and yet Lake Manasaravar is calm, clear, and fresh, while neighboring Lake Rakshastal is saline, choppier, and considered inhospitable by local tradition. Manasaravar itself holds a genuine geographic distinction. It's widely regarded as the highest altitude freshwater lake of its size anywhere on Earth, sitting more than 4,500 meters above sea level. Its water so clear that pilgrims describe being able to see remarkably far beneath the surface, even in the thin, high-altitude light. Hindu and Buddhist pilgrims traditionally regard a ritual bath in Manasarovar's frigid waters as one of the most spiritually significant acts of the entire pilgrimage, believed to cleanse the accumulated sins of many lifetimes, despite water temperatures that hover barely above freezing for most of the year. Rakshastal, meanwhile, is traditionally associated with a demon king of Hindu legend and is largely avoided for ritual bathing. Its crescent half-moon shape, sometimes described in local tradition as visually embodying its more ominous reputation. The dramatic chemical difference between two lakes fed by the same water source is a genuine, if modest, hydrological puzzle. One geologists attribute to differences in mineral composition, depth, and drainage patterns between the two basins, an explanation considerably less thrilling than Sacred Lake versus Demon Lake, but one grounded in actual water chemistry rather than legend. It's worth being direct about Muldashev's broader scientific credibility, since it rarely comes up in the retellings of his Kailash claims. His actual professional background is in ophthalmology. He built a legitimate reputation in Russia for pioneering eye surgery techniques, a credential frequently cited by supporters of his Kailash theory as evidence of serious scientific standing, even though ophthalmic surgery has no particular bearing on glacial geology, structural engineering, or archaeology. Muldashev himself described Kailash not simply as a pyramid, but specifically as a vacuum pyramid, a term he used to suggest the structure functioned as some kind of energy-focusing device connected to what he called the collective unconscious of humanity, language that borrows more from New Age spiritual vocabulary than from any established branch of physics or engineering. Outside of his pyramid theory, Muldashev has also published claims about the existence of giant humanoid beings and mythical creatures, argued for fringe theories about human eye anatomy well outside mainstream ophthalmology, and built a public career substantially on ideas that mainstream scientific institutions in Russia and elsewhere have consistently declined to endorse. That track record is important context for evaluating the reliability of his Kailash conclusions, specifically not proof that every observation he made in Tibet was fabricated, but a clear signal that his conclusions arrived filtered through a worldview already primed to interpret ambiguous natural phenomena as evidence of lost civilizations and hidden human potential, rather than a neutral scientific process working backward from the evidence alone. There's a visual detail that Bon practitioners point to as more meaningful than anything in Muldashev's pyramid theory, and one that doesn't require any disputed measurement to observe. Under certain seasonal snow conditions, a naturally occurring rock formation on one face of the mountain becomes visible in a shape that closely resembles a left-facing swastika, an ancient symbol of good fortune across multiple Asian religious traditions long before its unrelated appropriation and inversion by 20th century European fascism. Bon tradition treats this seasonal pattern as physical confirmation of the mountain's identity as Yungdrung Gutseg, the 9-story swastika mountain, and photographs of the Antuji formation circulate widely among pilgrims and researchers alike, a case where an actual, photographable, natural feature carries centuries of specific religious meaning, in sharp contrast to Muldashev's unverified claims about hollow chambers and hidden geometry. Despite all of that, the pyramid theory has proven remarkably durable online, resurfacing every few years in new video essays, listicle articles, and viral social posts that rarely mention the original 1999 expedition by name, let alone the geological rebuttals that followed it. Part of that durability likely has nothing to do with Kailash specifically, and everything to do with the broader appetite for ancient advanced civilization content that treats pyramids, monuments, and sacred sites worldwide as pieces of one single hidden global story, a genre Kailash slots into easily, given its genuine visual resemblance to a a pyramid and its genuine ancient reputation for mystery. It's a pattern that shows up again and again in other unrelated locations. Naturally, pyramid-shaped hills in Bosnia have spent years at the center of a nearly identical ancient pyramid claim, likewise rejected by mainstream archaeologists and geologists as ordinary rock formations, and a stepped hillside in Indonesia called Gunung Padang has generated its own extended, still unresolved scientific controversy over whether portions of it were shaped by human hands far earlier than conventional archaeology allows. Kailash's pyramid theory didn't invent that broader appetite for hidden ancient engineering behind the world's most striking natural landmarks. It simply gave it one of its most visually convincing and most spiritually loaded backdrops to work with. What ties all of these cases together, Kailash included, is a consistent asymmetry between how quickly the extraordinary claim spreads and how slowly, if ever, the mundane correction catches up to it. A single expedition, a handful of self-published books, and 2 decades of repetition across blogs and video platforms have done more to shape the mountain's modern reputation for a huge segment of the online public than the underlying geological surveys and core samples that actually settled the question decades ago. It's worth sitting for a moment with just how rare Kailash's situation actually is. Most of the world's great unclimbed challenges are unclimbed because no one has yet found a way to survive the attempt. Sheer rock faces, unstable ice, altitudes where the human body simply begins to fail. Kailash is the opposite kind of unclimbed mountain entirely. A peak well within the demonstrated physical capability of modern mountaineers, left alone not by nature's refusal, but by a rare, sustained, cross-cultural agreement among 4 different religious traditions, a national government, and some of the most accomplished climbers alive that certain places are better left as they are. That kind of consensus restraint, arguably, is the far more remarkable story here than any pyramid ever could be, and it's one that needed no ancient civilization, no vacuum energy, and no warped physics to become one of the most genuinely mysterious mountains on Earth. None of that mystique required an ancient civilization to manufacture it in the first place either. The entire Tibetan plateau, Kailash included, exists because of one of the largest and slowest collisions in planetary history, the northward drift of the Indian tectonic plate into Eurasia, a process that began roughly 50 million years ago and continues almost imperceptibly to this day, thrusting the whole region skyward and folding its rock formations into the dramatic ranges seen today. Kailash's own conglomerate rock, essentially ancient riverbed, gravel, and sediment, compressed and cemented together over millions of years before being lifted to its current altitude, is itself a record of a much older landscape that existed long before the Himalayas rose around it. The mountain's improbable, geometric-looking form isn't evidence that something built it. It's a rare, visually striking record of exactly how much time, pressure, and patient natural process it actually takes to make a mountain look like it couldn't possibly be natural at all. So why has this particular mountain, alone among the world's great unclimbed peaks, generated both an entirely legitimate, centuries-old religious reverence and an entirely modern, evidence-free mythology of hollow pyramids and warped time? And why, more than 2 decades after basic geology and simple GPS math debunked most of its specific claims, does the pyramid theory keep resurfacing in new articles and viral posts as though it had never been checked at all? What do you think really keeps climbers off that summit? A mountain so sacred that even the world's greatest mountaineers have chosen to walk away from it, or something inside it that no core sample has managed to find yet?